A glimpse of golden Rome. Close your eyes and let me take you somewhere. Somewhere golden and ancient, where the weight of an empire rests on shoulders that understand the burden of carrying too much. It is the height of summer in Rome, and the sun hangs heavy over the 7 hills like molten bronze poured across marble. The year is 175 of the Common Era, and this city, this magnificent, impossible city, pulses with the heartbeat of the known world. From where we stand on the Palatine Hill, we can see it all spread before us like a living tapestry, woven from human ambition and divine aspiration. Listen, do you hear that? The sound rises from the streets below like a great symphony of existence. The clip-clop of horses' hooves on worn stone, the creak of wooden cartwheels carrying amphorae filled with olive oil from distant groves, merchants calling out their wares in a dozen languages, Latin mixing with Greek, Egyptian blending with Germanic tongues, creating a music that belongs only to Rome. The air itself tells stories. It carries the scent of fresh bread from the bakeries that line the Subura, where the common people make their homes in towering insula that seem to scrape the very belly of the sky. Mixed with that warmth is the sharp tang of wine, the green sweetness of herbs from the markets, and underneath it all, the faint perfume of incense, drifting from 100 temples where 100 gods receive their daily offerings. But there is something else in the air today, something that makes the citizens pause in their daily routines and glance toward the imperial palace, a quietness that seems to emanate from the very heart of power itself. For their emperor, their philosopher king, carries burdens that no amount of purple silk or golden laurels can ease. Let us walk together through these streets, you and I. Feel the smooth stones beneath your feet, worn to a gentle polish by millions of sandals, boots, and bare feet that have passed this way. The Via Appia stretches out like a great stone river, connecting this eternal city to the farthest reaches of an empire that spans from the mists of Britain to the sands of Egypt. Here, in the Forum Romanum, the business of empire unfolds with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. Senators in their pristine togas move with practiced dignity, their faces masks of political calculation. But watch their eyes. See how they dart and assess, always measuring, always performing. Even here, in the seat of ultimate power, the weight of expectation presses down like the summer heat. The columns of the Temple of Vesta rise before us, white as winter snow, their shadows providing blessed relief from the sun's intensity. Inside, the sacred flame flickers eternal, tended by women who have given up everything, marriage, children, the ordinary pleasures of life, to serve something greater than themselves. The Vestal virgins move through their duties with a serenity that speaks of sacrifice transformed into purpose. Water flows everywhere in this city, a liquid miracle that speaks to Roman ingenuity and ambition. The aqueducts bring the mountain streams directly to the heart of civilization, filling fountains that splash and gurgle with voices like liquid silver. Citizens pause to drink, to fill their vessels, to simply stand in the cooling mist that rises from the carved stone basins. And there, rising from the Campus Martius like a vision of earthly paradise, the baths of Caracalla spread their magnificent embrace. Though they bear the name of a later emperor, the foundations of such grandeur were laid in times like these, when Rome understood that true civilization meant more than conquest. It meant the elevation of daily life into something approaching art. Steam rises from the caldarium like incense to invisible gods. The hot waters embrace bodies weary from the day's labors, washing away not just the dust of the streets, but the accumulated weight of small compromises, tiny betrayals, the 1,000 little ways we bend ourselves to fit the shapes others expect of us. In the tepidarium, the warm room where temperatures gentle the transition from hot to cold, conversations flow as freely as the carefully channeled waters. Here, a merchant speaks quietly with a senator about grain shipments from Egypt. There, a poet shares verses with a group of young patricians whose eyes hold both privilege and a kind of restless emptiness that all the empire's wealth cannot fill. The frigidarium offers its cold shock, its bracing reminder that comfort, however luxurious, must sometimes give way to challenge. Bodies plunge into waters that steel the breath and quicken the heart, emerging gasping and alive in ways that the gentler pleasures cannot provide. But perhaps most beautiful of all are the gardens that surround these temples to human restoration. Here, cypress trees stand like dark green flames against the golden sky. Rose bushes, heavy with blooms, release their perfume into air that shimmers with heat and possibility. Fountains create their own small weather systems, their spray catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows that last only moments before dissolving back into mystery. Citizens recline on marble benches, their faces softened by contentment and the kind of deep relaxation that comes only when the body is truly cared for. Slaves move among them with oils and strigils, their hands skilled in the ancient arts of restoration. For these few hours, the hierarchies that govern Roman life seem to soften, not disappear, for that would be impossible, but gentled by shared humanity and the democracy of physical comfort. Yet even here, in this paradise of engineered pleasure, there are reminders of the vast machine that makes such luxury possible. A courier arrives with dispatches from the Germanic frontier, his dust-covered cloak speaking of hard roads and urgent news. A group of officers speak in low voices about troop movements in distant Britannia. The empire never sleeps, never pauses, never allows its guardians a moment of complete rest. And somewhere above it all, in chambers lined with the finest marble and cooled by slaves with peacock feather fans, the man who bears ultimate responsibility for this vast breathing organism of civilization sits with his thoughts and his ever-present burden of choice. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, emperor, reluctant god, understands something that perhaps only those who carry the weight of others' lives can truly comprehend. That power is not freedom, but its opposite. That every decision ripples outward like stones thrown into still water, creating consequences that will outlive the hand that cast them. The golden light of late afternoon begins to deepen, taking on that particular quality that belongs only to Rome in summer. Shadows lengthen and soften, providing blessed relief from the day's intensity. The sounds of the city begin their gradual transformation from the urgent business of day to the gentler rhythms of evening. Soon the sun will set behind the 7 hills, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that would make the gods themselves pause in wonder. Oil lamps will begin to flicker to life in windows throughout the city, creating a constellation at ground level that mirrors the stars emerging overhead. But for now, in this moment suspended between day and night, between the urgent demands of empire and the eternal questions of the human heart, we stand witness to something magnificent and fragile. A civilization at its peak, beautiful and terrible in its complexity, carrying within itself both the seeds of its own greatness and the quiet whispers of its eventual transformation. Here, in this golden city where marble dreams take solid form and human ambition reaches toward the divine, a story waits to unfold. A story of wisdom born from weariness, of strength discovered in gentleness, of a man who found in philosophy not escape from his burdens, but the grace to carry them with dignity. The evening star appears above the Palatine Hill, and somewhere in the imperial palace, an emperor sets down his stylus and prepares to teach us what it truly means to lead from a place of quiet strength. the emperor's burden. The marble floors of the palace whisper beneath his sandals as Marcus Aurelius walks the corridors of power in the pre-dawn darkness. While Rome sleeps, the emperor wakes, not by choice but by the weight of dreams that refuse to grant him peace. The burden of an empire stretches across his shoulders like an invisible cloak, heavy with the hopes and fears of millions who will never know his name, yet depend upon his wisdom. He pauses at a window overlooking the forum, where torches still flicker in the distance. Even now, at this quiet hour, the machinery of empire turns. Guards patrol the streets. Bakers knead tomorrow's bread. Ships arrive at Ostia carrying grain from Egypt, silk from the east, news from distant frontiers where Roman soldiers stand watch beneath foreign stars. Marcus places his palm against the cool stone of the window frame and feels the tremor of responsibility that never leaves him. To be emperor is to hold the heartbeat of the world in your hands, to know that every decision ripples outward like stones cast into still water, touching lives you will never see, shaping futures you cannot predict. In the private chambers beyond the public halls, Faustina sleeps peacefully, her dark hair spread across silk pillows. Even in rest, she carries her own burdens. The weight of being an empress, of bearing children destined for greatness or tragedy, of loving a man who belongs not to her alone, but to history itself. Marcus watches her for a moment, this woman who anchors him to his humanity when the demands of leadership threaten to transform him into something cold and distant. Their love is real, tender, complicated by the pressures that surround them like invisible walls. She understands what others cannot, that power isolates as much as it elevates, that every crown is also a kind of prison. In her presence, he remembers that beneath the purple robes beats the heart of a man who simply wants to do right in a world that rarely offers clear answers. The emperor moves quietly to his study, where scrolls await his attention and a lamp burns low beside his writing desk. Here, in these precious hours before dawn summons him to the public performance of leadership, he finds solace in philosophy, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The teachings of the Stoics speak to him with particular clarity in these dark moments. Epictetus, once a slave, understood suffering from its depths. Seneca knew the corrupting whisper of power. Their words offer not escape from difficulty, but a way to meet it with dignity intact. They teach him that some things lie within his control, his thoughts, his responses, his commitment to virtue, while others remain forever beyond his reach. Marcus takes up his stylus and begins to write, not for posterity, but for his own troubled soul. These private meditations become his anchor, reminders to himself of what matters when the weight of empire threatens to crush his spirit. "You have power over your mind," he writes, "not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The words flow onto the parchment like water finding its level, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of sleepless nights and difficult days. He writes about the impermanence of all things, how even the mightiest empire will one day crumble to dust, how every triumph and tragedy fades into the vast river of time. This is not despair speaking, but liberation, the recognition that what truly matters transcends the temporary theater of worldly success. Beyond the palace walls, reports arrive daily from the northern frontiers, where Germanic tribes press against Roman borders. The Marco-Mannic Wars demand his attention, his resources, his very presence on distant battlefields, where philosophy must yield to the harsh realities of military necessity. Yet even in these moments of crisis, Marcus seeks to apply the principles that guide his inner life to the brutal calculus of leadership. He does not relish conflict, does not find glory in conquest. War, to him, is a necessary evil, a burden that comes with the responsibility of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The Stoic emperor approaches even warfare with reluctance, seeing in every enemy a fellow human being caught in the vast machinery of historical forces beyond any individual's control. The lamp flickers as dawn approaches, casting dancing shadows across the pages of his private journal. Marcus sets down his stylus and reads what he has written. Reminders to himself about patience, about accepting what cannot be changed while working tirelessly to improve what can be influenced. These are not the grand pronouncements of a conqueror, but the quiet reflections of a man trying to remain human under inhuman pressures. He thinks of his children, sleeping safely in their beds, unaware that their father carries the weight of the world to spare them from its crushing burden. What kind of legacy will he leave them? Not merely an empire of territories and treasures, but perhaps something more valuable. An example of how to bear responsibility with grace, how to find meaning in service rather than domination. The emperor rises from his desk as the first light of dawn touches the eastern hills. Soon, the palace will wake. Advisors will arrive with urgent matters. Citizens will seek audience. The public performance of leadership will begin anew, and Marcus Aurelius will once again don the mask of imperial authority. But for now, in these final moments of solitude, he allows himself to feel the full weight of his humanity. He is not a god, despite what the flatterers whisper. He is not infallible, despite what the courtiers pretend. He is simply a man trying to do his best in circumstances that would break lesser spirits. Finding in philosophy not an escape from responsibility, but the strength to embrace it fully. The morning star fades as the sun climbs higher, and somewhere in the distance, the great city of Rome begins to stir. Marcus Aurelius straightens his shoulders, prepares to face another day of impossible decisions and competing demands, but he carries with him now the quiet strength that comes from accepting life as it is, rather than as he wishes it might be. This is the burden of the philosopher-emperor, to lead with wisdom rather than force, to find in the ancient teachings of the Stoics a way to remain compassionate in the face of cruelty, reasonable in the midst of chaos, human despite the dehumanizing pressures of absolute power. It is a burden he bears not for glory, but for love of his people, his family, his ideals, and the fragile hope that wisdom might triumph over the darkness that always threatens to engulf the world. The day awaits with all its trials and tribulations, but Marcus Aurelius faces it armed with something more powerful than legions or gold, the quiet certainty that comes from knowing who you are when no one is watching, and choosing virtue even when it costs you everything. Echoes of the city. The city stirs beneath him as Marcus begins his morning rituals. From his private chambers he can hear Rome awakening, the distant clatter of cartwheels on stone, the calls of merchants setting up their stalls, the gentle splash of fountains that never sleep. These sounds have become the soundtrack of his life, a constant reminder that he rules not over maps or abstractions, but over real people living real lives. In the scriptorium below, a young scribe named Gaius dips his reed pen in ink and begins copying the emperor's correspondence. He has served in this capacity for 3 years now and has learned to read between the lines of imperial business. Today's letters reveal the same careful balance Marcus strikes every day, responding to a governor's request for additional grain shipments to a drought-stricken province, reviewing architectural plans for new aqueducts, mediating a trade dispute between merchant guilds. Gaius pauses in his work, listening to the footsteps above. The emperor rises early, always. Sometimes Gaius hears him pacing and wonders what thoughts occupy that brilliant mind in the quiet hours before dawn. The young scribe has glimpsed the private writings. those personal meditations the emperor keeps for himself, philosophy mixed with exhaustion, wisdom tempered by very human doubt. The morning light grows stronger, casting long shadows through the corridors of the palace. Servants move quietly through their duties, their soft-soled shoes whispering against marble floors. There is something almost sacred about these early hours, before the day's demands fully take hold. Even the most powerful man in the world deserves these moments of peace. Beyond the palace walls, the Subura district comes alive with its own rhythms. Bakers have been working since before dawn, their ovens filling narrow streets with the warm scent of fresh bread. Children chase each other between the legs of adults hurrying to work. Women gather at public fountains, their conversations mixing gossip with genuine concern for neighbors and family. This is the Rome that Marcus carries in his heart, not the marble monuments or golden temples, but the everyday humanity of ordinary people trying to live good lives. A mother teaching her daughter to weave, an old man sharing stories with younger listeners, a merchant treating his customers fairly even when he could easily cheat them. These small acts of decency happen thousands of times each day, largely unseen and unrecorded, yet they form the true foundation of civilization. Gaius sets down his pen and stretches his fingers. Through the window, he can see the forum beginning to fill with the day's business. Senators in their togas, foreign ambassadors with their exotic dress, citizens seeking justice in the courts. All of them ultimately dependent on the wisdom and character of one man who never asked for such responsibility. The scribe has noticed something others might miss, how the emperor's handwriting changes throughout the day. Morning letters are steady, controlled, each character formed with precision. By evening, there is a slight tremor, a weight that seems to press down on the very ink, the burden of empire, made visible in the space between words. A soft knock interrupts Gaius's thoughts. A servant enters with the emperor's morning meal. Simple fare, as always, bread, fruit, water, mixed with a little wine. Marcus Aurelius could command the finest delicacies from across the known world, yet he chooses simplicity. Not from lack of appreciation for pleasure, but from understanding that true satisfaction comes from within. The sounds from the street below grow more complex as the city fully awakens. Hammers ring against anvils in the metalworkers' quarter. Horses whinny as they're harnessed to carts loaded with goods from distant provinces. The multilingual chatter of the markets, where Latin mixes with Greek, Germanic dialects, and tongues from the far reaches of Africa and Asia. This diversity is both Rome's greatest strength and its greatest challenge. How do you govern a world where every province has its own customs, its own gods, its own understanding of justice? Marcus approaches this question not with the arrogance of conquest, but with the humility of philosophy. He seeks to understand before seeking to be understood. Gaius returns to his copying, but his mind wanders to his own small concerns. His sister is to be married next month, and he's been saving his wages to help with the dowry. His mother's health has been declining, and he worries about her care. These personal anxieties seem trivial compared to the weight of empire, yet they are no less real for being small. Perhaps this is what the emperor understands better than most, that every person carries their own universe of hopes and fears, dreams and disappointments. A good ruler must somehow hold space for all of these individual stories, while still making decisions that serve the greater good. The morning progresses with its familiar patterns. Petitioners gather in the antechambers, each carrying requests that seem urgent and vital to them. A farmer whose crops have failed, a widow seeking justice for her murdered son, a young man hoping for appointment to a minor administrative position. Marcus will see them all, listening with the same careful attention he gives to matters of war and diplomacy. From his desk, Gaius can hear the emperor's voice through the walls. Never raised in anger, always measured and thoughtful. Even when delivering difficult news or unwelcome decisions, Marcus speaks with a gentleness that acknowledges the humanity of those who come before him. The sun climbs higher and the palace grows warm despite the thick stone walls. Servants adjust the curtains and shutters, managing light and air with the practiced efficiency that keeps the machinery of government running smoothly. These are the invisible hands that support power. The cooks and cleaners, the guards and gardeners, the scribes and secretaries who transform imperial will into practical reality. Gaius thinks about the letters he's copied this morning, each one representing lives affected by imperial decisions. A new road that will connect isolated villages to major trade routes, funding for a school where children of freed slaves can learn to read and write, instructions to a general to show mercy to defeated enemies who surrender willingly. These are not the dramatic gestures that historians will remember, but they are the daily acts of leadership that actually shape the world. Marcus Aurelius governs through 1,000 small choices, each one guided by his philosophical commitment to virtue and reason. The morning air carries the scent of cooking food, burning incense, and the green smell of gardens being watered. Life continues its ancient rhythms, largely indifferent to the grand movements of history. People fall in love, raise children, create beauty, mourn losses, and find meaning in ways that transcend politics and power. This is what Marcus sees when he looks out over his city. Not subjects to be controlled, but fellow travelers on the difficult journey of human existence, each person struggling with their own version of the questions that keep him awake at night. How do we live well? How do we face suffering with dignity? How do we love without attachment, serve without ego, lead without corruption? The answers, if they exist at all, must be discovered anew by each generation, each individual. All any of us can do is try to embody the values we hope to see in the world and trust that goodness, like ripples in a pond, will somehow spread beyond our ability to measure or control. Meditations in stone. The morning light filters through the marble columns of the palace, casting long shadows across the floor where Marcus sits in contemplation. In his hands, he holds a small piece of stone, smooth river rock, worn by countless years of water and time. He turns it over in his palm, feeling its weight, its coolness against his skin. This simple stone has become his teacher. Everything flows, he whispers to himself, echoing the words of Heraclitus. Everything changes. The rock was once part of a mountain, towering and seemingly permanent. Rain and wind broke it free, rivers carried it, tumbling it smooth, and now it rests here in the palm of an emperor, who himself is no more permanent than the stone. Marcus has learned to find philosophy not in grand treatises, but in these quiet moments of observation. The Stoics taught that wisdom comes from understanding our place in the natural order, accepting what we cannot change, and focusing our energy only on what lies within our control. Our thoughts, our responses, our choices in how we meet each moment. But this morning, as reports arrive from the northern frontier, as senators wait in the antechamber with their endless requests and complaints, as the weight of empire presses down upon his shoulders, Marcus finds himself struggling with the gap between philosophical understanding and human feeling. He knows intellectually that his anxiety about the Germanic tribes serves no purpose. The armies are deployed. The preparations are made. His worry cannot change the outcome of battles being fought hundreds of miles away, and yet the worry remains. He knows that his frustration with certain senators is a choice, that their incompetence reflects on them, not on him, that he can choose patience over anger, understanding over judgment. And yet, the frustration burns in his chest like a small, persistent flame. This is the reality of philosophy he has discovered. not a magic cure for human emotion, but a practice, a daily discipline of returning again and again to what matters most. He sets the stone on his desk and reaches for his private journal, the collection of thoughts and reflections that no one else will ever read. These pages have become his sanctuary, the place where he can be honest about his struggles, his doubts, his very human failures to live up to the ideals he holds dear. You have power over your mind, not outside events, he writes, copying a reminder he has written countless times before. Realize this, and you will find strength. The words feel both true and impossible this morning. Outside his window, Rome awakens to another day. Merchants setting up their stalls, children running through the streets, slaves carrying water from the fountains, each of them carrying their own burdens, their own fears, their own small hopes for happiness and peace. Marcus closes his eyes and tries to feel his connection to this vast web of human experience. The Stoics taught that we are all part of a single, living organism, that the welfare of the whole is inseparable from our own welfare. When he remembers this, his personal anxieties seem smaller, less urgent. But when he forgets, when he becomes lost in the endless details of governance, the petty politics, the crushing responsibility of decisions that affect millions of lives, then philosophy becomes just words on a page, and he feels as lost as any ordinary man. He thinks of the Colosseum, that great amphitheater that stands as a symbol of Roman power and spectacle. During the games, it fills with 50,000 voices, roaring approval or disapproval, drunk on blood and entertainment. But Marcus prefers to visit it in the early morning hours, when it stands empty and silent. In that vast, quiet space, he can feel the impermanence of all things, the gladiators who fought and died there. Where are they now? The emperors who presided over the games, basking in the crowd's adoration. Their names are already fading from memory. Even the building itself, solid as it seems, will someday crumble into dust. This is not a morbid thought, but a liberating one. If nothing lasts forever, then neither do our sufferings, neither do our failures, neither do our fears. The stone on his desk catches the light, and Marcus picks it up again. Somewhere, a river is still flowing, still shaping new stones, still carrying them toward unknown destinations. The process that created this small, perfect object continues. Patient, persistent, indifferent to human ambition or anxiety. What disturbs people's minds is not events but their judgments on events, he writes, quoting Epictetus, the former slave whose teachings have become his guide. For instance, death is nothing dreadful, or else it would have appeared so to Socrates. But the terror consists in our notion of death, that it is dreadful. The same principle applies to everything that causes him distress. The Germanic tribes are not inherently threatening. They are simply people trying to survive, to find better lands for their families, to build their own version of security and prosperity. His judgment that they threaten Rome. This is where the suffering begins. The incompetent senators are not evil. They are simply limited, working within their own understanding, doing what they believe is best. His judgment that they should be different, better, wiser. This is where his frustration takes root. Even his own perceived failures as an emperor, as a husband, as a human being, these are not facts, but interpretations. Stories he tells himself about what success should look like, what a good life should contain. But what if he could learn to hold these stories more lightly? What if he could meet each moment with curiosity rather than judgment, with acceptance rather than resistance? The morning grows warmer, and somewhere in the palace he can hear the sounds of preparation for the day's official duties. Soon the doors will open, and the endless stream of petitioners, advisors, and administrators will begin. He will need to be the emperor again, decisive, authoritative, wise. But for now, in this quiet space between night and day, he can simply be a man holding a stone, contemplating the mystery of existence, trying to find his way towards something resembling peace. He thinks of Faustina still sleeping in their chambers. How many mornings has she watched him struggle with these same questions? How many times has she offered her silent support as he wrestles with the gap between who he wants to be and who he actually is? Love, he has learned, is perhaps the greatest teacher of all. Not the romantic love of poets, but the deeper love that accepts imperfection, that chooses commitment over convenience, that finds beauty in the ordinary moments of shared life. When he loves Faustina, he doesn't love an ideal or an image. He loves a real woman with her own fears and flaws and struggles, and in receiving her love, he experiences something he can never give himself: unconditional acceptance of his humanity. The stone grows warm in his palm, such a small thing, and yet it contains the entire history of the earth, the slow dance of elements, the patient work of time, the endless cycle of creation and destruction that underlies all existence. Marcus sets it down gently and prepares to meet the day. The philosophy will come with him, not as a shield against difficulty, but as a companion, a quiet voice reminding him that this too shall pass, that his only real task is to respond to whatever comes with as much wisdom and compassion as he can manage. And when he fails, when anxiety overtakes him, when frustration clouds his judgment, when the weight of empire crushes his good intentions, the stone will still be here, smooth and patient, teaching its silent lesson about acceptance, endurance, and the strange peace that comes from surrendering to the flow of things we cannot control. Whispers of doubt, glimmers of hope, but perhaps we have been too quick to accept certain stories about those closest to him. The whispers that followed Faustina through the corridors of power, the accusations that painted her as unfaithful, manipulative, dangerous to the very stability of the empire. These stories passed down through centuries, written by men who never knew her, who saw only what they expected to see in an empress who dared to live fully in a world that demanded women disappear into shadows. History, after all, is written by those who survive it, and rarely by those who love deeply enough to be vulnerable to its cruelest judgments. Tonight, as we walk these ancient streets, we might ask ourselves, what if the stories were wrong? What if the woman Marcus Aurelius loved with such quiet devotion was not the scheming figure of imperial gossip, but someone far more complex, far more human? What if her supposed transgressions were nothing more than the freedom to speak her mind, to influence decisions, to exist as more than a beautiful ornament in the emperor's carefully ordered world? The evidence, when we examine it closely, is thin, built more on assumption than fact. Male historians, writing decades or centuries later, seemed almost eager to believe the worst about a woman who had wielded influence. They could not fathom that Marcus Aurelius, this paragon of Stoic virtue, might have been drawn to someone who challenged him, who brought passion and complexity to his measured existence. And so they created their version of Faustina, the adulteress, the schemer, the woman whose very presence threatened the moral fabric of the empire. But what if she was simply a woman who refused to be diminished? What if her crime was nothing more than being fully herself in an age that demanded women be half-formed shadows of men's expectations? Marcus Aurelius himself left us clues, scattered through his private writings like breadcrumbs leading back to truth, his gratitude for her, his references to her wisdom, her strength, her partnership in the impossible task of ruling an empire. These are not the words of a man deceived, but of someone who found in another person the missing pieces of himself. Consider this. In all his meditations, in all his careful examinations of his own failings and fears, he never once questions her loyalty, never once suggests that the woman he shares his bed with, his thoughts with, his deepest vulnerabilities with, is anything other than a source of strength and comfort. Would a man so committed to honest self-reflection, so unflinching in his analysis of human nature, be so blind to deception in his own home? Or perhaps he saw what others could not. That strength in a woman is often mistaken for defiance, that intelligence is often called manipulation, that the very qualities that would be celebrated in a man, in a woman, become evidence of moral corruption. The grand baths of Caracalla rise before us now. Though they are still decades in the future, we can imagine their predecessors, the smaller but no less magnificent baths where Romans of Marcus Aurelius's time gathered to cleanse both body and spirit. The marble gleams even in moonlight, columns reaching toward stars that have watched this city rise and fall and rise again. Here, in spaces designed for community, for the sharing of water and warmth and human connection, the emperor himself would have come, setting aside the purple of his office to become simply another citizen seeking renewal. But tonight he is not here among the crowds. Tonight we find him in a different kind of sanctuary, the quiet study adjacent to his private chambers, where scrolls line the walls like sleeping sentinels and oil lamps cast dancing shadows across familiar texts. Here, surrounded by the wisdom of ages, Epictetus, Chrysippus, Cleanthus, he sits with his own thoughts, his own doubts, his own very human need to make sense of a world that often seems to resist all attempts at understanding. The contrast is striking. While his subjects luxuriate in the communal warmth of the baths, their emperor seeks solace in solitude, in the company of philosophers long dead, but somehow more present than the living advisors who surround him during daylight hours. His hand moves slowly across papyrus, not crafting policy or signing death warrants, but wrestling with questions that have no easy answers. How does one love fully while accepting impermanence? How does one lead with compassion in a world that rewards cruelty? How does one maintain hope when every day brings fresh evidence of human suffering, human folly, human limitation? And perhaps this is where Faustina's true value becomes clear. Not as the perfect empress of public imagination, not as the scheming seductress of historical gossip, but as the one person who sees him not as emperor or philosopher or symbol, but simply as Marcus, the man who doubts, who struggles, who sometimes lies awake at night wondering if any of his efforts matter in the vast sweep of time and change. She would understand, better than anyone, the weight of performance, the exhaustion that comes from being everything to everyone while somehow remaining true to yourself. She would know the particular loneliness of power, the way it isolates even as it connects, the way it demands perfection while offering only human tools to achieve it. In his writings, we catch glimpses of their conversations, her insights woven so seamlessly into his own thinking that we can barely distinguish where her influence begins and his ends. This is not the mark of manipulation, but of true partnership, the kind of relationship where two minds meet and create something larger than either could achieve alone. Perhaps that was her real transgression, not adultery or political scheming, but the audacity to be his intellectual equal in an age that preferred its empresses beautiful and silent. Perhaps the whispers began not from evidence of wrongdoing, but from the uncomfortable sight of a woman who refused to disappear into the background of her husband's greatness. And perhaps, just perhaps, that refusal to diminish herself was exactly what Marcus Aurelius needed. A reminder that strength comes in many forms, that wisdom is not the exclusive province of men, that even emperors need someone who will challenge them to be more than their circumstances demand. Aurelius and the scribe, The scribe Gaius knew these truths better than most. In the quiet corners of the palace, where marble gave way to simple wood and stone, he had witnessed moments that would never find their way into the official histories. He had seen the emperor pause in dictating a letter to read a message from his youngest daughter, had watched him set aside urgent dispatches from Germania to comfort a servant whose child had fallen ill. These were not the grand gestures that poets would sing about, but they were the moments that revealed the man beneath the purple. On one particular morning, as autumn light filtered through the narrow windows of the scriptorium, Gaius found himself tasked with transcribing the emperor's personal correspondence. The letters were not meant for public consumption. They were simple, human, filled with the everyday concerns of a father and husband who happened to rule the world. "My dearest Faustina," one letter began, and Gaius could hear the warmth in the words, even as he copied them in his careful script. "The campaign grows long, and I find myself thinking not of victory, but of the garden at home, of your laughter echoing through the corridors, of the way you challenge my certainties and make me a better man." The scribe's hand moved steadily across the papyrus, but his mind wandered to his own small apartment, his own wife waiting at home. How strange that an emperor's longings could mirror those of a simple clerk. Later that same day, Gaius accompanied Marcus Aurelius to the palace gardens. The emperor often walked there when the weight of decisions grew too heavy. The gardens were not grand by Roman standards, no elaborate fountains or exotic blooms, just simple paths winding between olive trees and herb beds, places where a man could think without the burden of spectacle. They walked in comfortable silence, the emperor's hands clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed, not with anger, but with the deep concentration of someone trying to understand rather than judge. A group of kitchen servants passed, carrying baskets of bread for the evening meal, and Marcus Aurelius nodded to each of them by name. "Gaius," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever wonder what history will remember of these days?" The scribe considered carefully before answering. In the service of lesser men. Such a question might have been a trap, but Marcus Aurelius asked because he genuinely wanted to know. "I think, Caesar, that history remembers the wars and the buildings, the grand pronouncements and the public ceremonies, but perhaps the truest measure of a reign lies in the smaller moments, the kindness shown to servants, the letters written to loved ones, the decision to listen rather than simply command." The emperor stopped walking, his gaze fixed on a simple stone bench beneath an ancient fig tree. "I fear I am not the ruler Rome expected," he said, and there was something almost vulnerable in his admission. "I have no appetite for conquest, no desire to expand the borders simply for glory. I would rather spend my days in study, in conversation, in trying to understand what it means to live well." "Perhaps," Gaius ventured, "that is exactly what Rome needs. Not another conqueror, but someone who remembers that an empire is made of people, individual lives, each as complex and worthy as your own." They sat together on the stone bench, emperor and scribe, two men sharing the weight of their respective responsibilities. The afternoon light slanted through the fig leaves, casting gentle shadows on the gravel path. Somewhere in the distance, the sounds of the city continued, but here, in this quiet corner, there was only peace. "Faustina says something similar," Marcus Aurelius murmured, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "She reminds me that strength is not always about endurance. Sometimes it is about knowing when to bend, when to admit uncertainty, when to choose compassion over conquest." The scribe nodded, thinking of all the powerful men he had served, how few had possessed the courage to show such honesty, true strength, he realized, lay not in never doubting, but in continuing to act with kindness despite the doubts. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the garden in shades of gold and amber, both men sat in comfortable silence, each lost in his own thoughts, each finding in this moment of stillness a kind of peace that no amount of worldly success could provide. The road ahead. The evening shadows grew longer, stretching across the marble pathways like fingers reaching toward eternity. Marcus Aurelius rose slowly from the bench, his movements deliberate and measured, while Gaius gathered the scrolls with practiced efficiency, the weight of the day's decision still pressed upon the emperor's shoulders. Yet something in his posture had shifted, a subtle relaxation that spoke of burdens momentarily set aside. "Walk with me, Gaius," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weariness of countless such evenings. "Let us see what wisdom the dying light might offer." They moved through the gardens at an unhurried pace, past fountains that whispered ancient secrets, past roses that had witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties. The air carried the scent of jasmine and the distant sounds of a city settling into dusk, merchants closing their stalls, children being called home, the eternal rhythm of human life continuing its dance. Marcus paused beside a statue of his predecessor, Antoninus Pius, whose marble face gazed serenely into the distance. "Do you think he knew," the emperor mused, "how his choices would echo through the years, how the kindness he showed to a single citizen might ripple outward, touching lives he would never see?" Gaius considered this carefully, understanding that his emperor was speaking as much to himself as to his companion. Perhaps Caesar. The greatest leaders are those who plant trees knowing they will never sit in their shade. A gentle smile crossed Marcus's weathered features. "Trees," he repeated softly. "Yes, I think Faustina would appreciate that image. She always said that love was like tending a garden, requiring patience, accepting that some seasons would be more fruitful than others." The mention of his wife brought a distant look to his eyes, as if he could see across the miles that separated them. In her letters, she'd written of their children's laughter, of small moments of joy that seemed to shine brighter against the backdrop of his absence. These fragments of domestic happiness felt more precious than any military victory, more lasting than any monument carved in stone. "The road ahead," Marcus said, his gaze turning toward the horizon where the sun hung low and golden. "Sometimes I wonder what future generations will make of our struggles, whether they will understand that every choice, every moment of doubt, every act of compassion was simply a human being trying to do what seemed right." They walked on, their footsteps creating a quiet rhythm against the stone. The palace behind them glowed in the amber light, its columns and arches testament to the enduring power of human ambition. Yet Marcus found himself thinking not of empires or legacies, but of the simple truth that had sustained him through countless difficult days, that each person he encountered carried their own invisible burdens, their own hopes and fears. "The Stoics teach us that we are all part of something larger," he said, his voice growing softer as the light continued to fade. "Not just Rome, not just this moment in history, but the great web of human experience that connects every soul who has ever looked up at these same stars and wondered about their place in the world." A cool breeze stirred the leaves around them, carrying with it the promise of night and the gentle embrace of rest. Marcus felt his shoulders relax further, the constant tension of command giving way to something deeper, a recognition that his struggles, his doubts, his small victories and quiet defeats were all part of an ancient pattern, threads in a tapestry too vast for any single mind to comprehend. "Come," he said finally, turning back toward the palace. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own opportunities for kindness. Tonight, let us simply be grateful for the peace we have found, however temporary it may be. The stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky above Rome. A quiet end. The palace settled into its familiar rhythm of night, servants padding softly through marble corridors, oil lamps flickering in their bronze holders, the distant murmur of the city gradually giving way to silence. Marcus Aurelius paused at his study door, looking back once at the scrolls and tablets that held his private thoughts, his wrestling with duty and desire, his attempts to understand what it meant to live well in an imperfect world. In the morning, there would be petitions to hear, decisions that would ripple across the empire, the weight of countless lives pressing upon his shoulders. But tonight belonged to the simple truth he had discovered in these quiet hours, that wisdom was not found in having all the answers, but in learning to ask better questions, in choosing compassion over judgment, in accepting the beautiful uncertainty of being human. The stone from the riverbank sat on his desk, smooth and unremarkable, a reminder that even the mightiest forces eventually yield to time, that empires rise and fall like waves upon an endless shore, that what matters is not how long we endure, but how gently we touch the lives around us while we are here. He thought of Faustina, already asleep in their chambers, her breathing steady and peaceful, and felt grateful for the love that had taught him that strength could be tender, that vulnerability was not weakness, but the courage to remain open to wonder. He thought of Gaius, faithful in his quiet service, finding meaning in small acts of care, and understood that every life, however humble it might seem, carried its own irreplaceable light. The emperor extinguished his lamp, and in the gentle darkness felt himself becoming part of something larger, older, more enduring than any single story, as the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and Rome breathed softly beneath the infinite sky, and somewhere in the distance, the river continued its patient journey toward the sea, carrying with it the whispered hopes and dreams of all who had ever paused beside its banks, seeking peace, seeking meaning, seeking the quiet grace that comes only when we finally learn to let ourselves simply, beautifully, be